So we are going to kick off our first panel in our symposium. It brings me great joy to have these three guests joining us here today. Our first topic is the question, how do biases, uncertainty, power, and inequities shape our trust in science and influence policy? And so with that, I'll invite my guests to go ahead and turn on their cameras, and I'll give them a very brief introduction, which does not do any of them justice. I do encourage you to Google them or go check out their bios on our website if you want to learn just a little bit more. But our panel today has three very distinguished guests. We have Eitan Hersh, who is the Associate Professor of Political Science at Tufts University. His research focuses on U.S. elections, voting rights, and civic participation. Dr. Hersh is the author of Politics is for Power, which is a new book that I highly recommend. I think I got it at the end of 2019, and started reading it, and it's a really, really good book that I think he'll probably speak to some of the points on in today's panel. We also have Nneka Sederstrom. Dr. Sederstrom is the Director of Clinical Ethics at Children's Hospital in Minnesota. She's made a career of asking and exploring important questions around ethics in medicine. Dr. Cedarstrom holds advanced degrees in both medical sociology, public health, and philosophy. And if those of you are following our overarching theme for day one, it is the philosophy of science, trust, and human nature. So she brings a really interesting, varied background and going to be a great contributor to this discussion as well. And our other guest joining us today is the lovely Jen Schwartz, who is the senior editor of Features for Scientific American. And she previously worked for Popular Science, GQ, Boston Globe, and a whole other slew of major news outlets. She's an award-winning reporter and producer of stories that work at the intersection of technology, science, and society. I was reading many of her lovely articles this year that really brought in the human component and understanding of systems to a lot of the work. I do want to make one more point before I turn this over to our panel and let them take off from here, which is we do have a virtual bookshelf, if any of you have seen it. It's on the main symposium website. Apollo Zero that George recommended, some of the articles and books from our guests are all on there. It's a great reading list to take you into the rest of December and the new year. So I encourage you, when you have a little downtime, to go check out our virtual bookshelf. So with that, let me welcome our guests and quit talking and turn this over to Jen.
Thanks so much. It's really great to be here. And this topic, I think, has been front of mind for me for the past year. And you know, it might have been always what I've covered as a journalist, but there's obviously been just a new level of confronting and grappling, and also sort of seeing a lot of experiments play out in real time, and in many times on an accelerated timeline. So I think we're all trying to, you know, at least I am, and I know the panelists are, you know, get our heads around these really big questions. And so, you know, the topic of this panel, how do biases, uncertainty, power, and inequities shape our trust in science, and how do they influence policy? Sort of like all the questions wrapped into one. And so we're going to try to really focus on what we can do right now, and try to narrow it down to getting our heads around some of these problems and doing a better job reallocating our energy so that we can be more effective in terms of, you know, reinstating trust in science and influencing policy, you know, without exhausting ourselves. There's been a lot of overwhelm, a lot of chaos, intentionally created or not. And so I think it's about refocusing, sort of taking a breath, taking a pause, and using the work of, you know, both of these experts to start to illuminate a path forward that's a little more, you know, feels more effective and a little more grounded and grounded in reality. So, you know, I would like to let each of them first talk a little bit about their work, so that we can get to know them and where their areas of focus are. So Nneka, if you would like to start, just take a few minutes to tell us about your work and what you do.
Sure. Thank you very much. And thank you to the Institute for having me on today. Excuse me. My name is Nneka Sederstrom, and I'm the current director of the Clinical Ethics Department at Children's. I have made my life be completely immersed in the idea of ethics and equity. I've been doing this work for about I don't maybe want to date myself, but at least 20 years. I used to run the Center for Ethics at MedStar Washington Hospital Center in Washington, D.C. My research and background has been full of studies related to how African American experiences in medicine are, issues around trust in medicine, from the clinical ethics world, looking at how ethics and equity go hand in hand, specifically around a lot of issues in end-of-life care, and how to address equity and ethics at end-of-life care in populations where you don't typically have opportunities to do things like engage in hospice conversation earlier, or don't have enough trust. And so we end up having fates worse than death, as I've said sometimes. So I have tried really hard to focus my work and my research in trying to come up with avenues and ways to adjust inequity, to be more deliberate and intentional at looking at our reality and facing our truths, and addressing some sort of reconciliation in order to move forward. And so hopefully through more conversation on how power and bias play into medical inequities, we can try and engage in some really good forward-thinking opportunities to be able to move this conversation forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Eitan?
Yeah, nice to be here with you, and thanks for putting this together. So, brief introduction to my work. I do research, mostly statistical research about politics, about how ordinary people behave in politics. I've done some work on how people like doctors behave in politics. I do a lot of work on voting rights. I testify in court cases about issues like voter ID laws. But most recently, my work has been focused on civic engagement. And the reason it's been focused on civic engagement, and the reason I wrote a whole book about civic engagement, is because I've noticed this weird thing happening in American politics, which is people are increasingly cognitively engaged in politics, spending a lot of time thinking and worrying about politics, and not a lot of time doing politics. So when I say doing politics, I mean, when we do politics and ordinary citizens do politics, we work with other people, we have some goal and some strategy for reaching that goal to influence the government, to get the government to do what we want it to do, whether we have a strategy of talking to other voters to get different people elected, or talking to policymakers to get different policies implemented. It's about goals and a strategy. But in my own research and in the research of the political science field, when you look at ordinary citizens behaving in politics, from how they spend their time in news consumption or as kind of partisan cheerleaders, as amateur pundits online, as one-click $5 donors, none of that looks like strategic behavior. It looks more like we're engaging in this bizarre leisure activity I call political hobbyism. We're doing something for our own intellectual and emotional needs and gratifications, but not to move other people, not to get things done. And so the book I wrote on this topic is about a diagnosis, really, for people who are spending a lot of time in politics, but when they look in the mirror about how they're spending that time, might feel like, oh, goodness, this is not really how I should be effectively spending my time. The book's about why we do that. Like, where does this come from? What are the cultural, historical, technological reasons we increasingly do politics like this? I mean, again, cognitive engagement is at an all-time high, but organizational engagement is not. Why it's bad, right? Why this is actually damaging to our own political goals to treat politics like a kind of an at-home hobby, even not in COVID times, an at-home hobby. And most importantly, I spent a lot of time over the last couple of years with organizers and volunteers all across the country who do a very different form of politics, who do politics for power, which sounds a little scary. So since power is in this topic, I want to just define it so we know what we're talking about, because some people are put off by the idea that politics is for power, which seems like creepy. All this means is that in politics, we're trying to get people to do something they wouldn't otherwise do. That's what power relationships are. We're trying to get someone else to act in a way that they wouldn't otherwise act. And we see this, we have power relationships at work. I'm a teacher, so with my students, I'm a parent of young kids, so I'm in a power relationship with my kids. Sometimes I need them to like get in the bath and they don't want to. That's how do I get them to do what I want them to do? And in politics, that's what we're doing. In theory, that's what we're doing. We're trying to get people to do something they wouldn't otherwise do. And if we can do that, then we have power in that relationship. But most of us, like 9 out of 10 of us, when we're doing politics, it's totally different. It's following polling and worrying and arguing and being a pundit. And so that's the difference that I've been very focused on. And anyway, looking forward to talking more. I'll turn it back to you, Jen.
So my first question to you, Eitan, was going to be to please define power for us, because I think it's really interesting that we don't really talk about where power comes from very often. It's not something, you know, we learn in school, the creation of power, who has it and why, or even realizing what power we might have as individuals. And of course, you know, a lot of efforts to take people's power away or to disenfranchise people. And I think that, you know, I would just love for you to say more about that, to continue on that point about, you know, especially in 2020, you know, we're right now, where is power coming from? And how could we learn about it better? You know, if you were trying to tell people how you could, you know, teach them about power and how they get it and what they might have that they don't realize that they have, how would you define it for them in an even more detailed way when you think about right now people sitting behind their computer screens, scrolling through Twitter and feeling quite overwhelmed? How would you sort of encourage people to understand where power comes from, and where it might be accessible to them in ways that they might not see right now?
Sure. So, you know, at the basic level in any democracy, right, we have some basic level of power that every person has one vote. And then the question is, how much more can you get, right? How much more can you get in politics than just your one vote? And obviously, by the way, maybe it's not obvious, we should know that when it comes to like local elections, state elections, where really important stuff is determined, how we respond to COVID, what racial equality looks like in our school system, on our police force, how our state's going to engage on climate change. Where all that action is, we have the lowest levels of voting participation. And so step number one is people have to realize their power is through their vote. But step number two is realizing how much more can you get. You know, in the book, I tell this story about a woman in Kiris Matias, who has a Latino coalition in her town in Haverhill, Massachusetts. And you know what power she has? She can bring 30 or 50 people from her community to meet with the school superintendent or to meet with the mayor. And, you know, that sounds, well, 30, 50 people in one town, what's that? It means a lot because most people can't do that. If you can bring 30 people or 40 people to meet with a police chief or a superintendent, all of a sudden those people have to say, oh, okay, I need to listen to you. And so at different parts of our lives, I mean, we have organizational leaders, business leaders who have a lot of power. They can influence people. And the question is, what do they do with that? How do they use it? You know, we have university leaders who could weigh in on all sorts of public issues or could refrain from doing it. And we have ordinary citizens. I mean, Kiris, the person I just mentioned, her job is she's a bus monitor for a special needs school. That's her job, Dominican immigrant. And she has a huge amount of power in her community because she stepped up and she thought about, okay, well, how do I move people? And, you know, all around us, there are people like her in our community who say, okay, if I need a lever, I need to get something done. I need to get something from my state legislator. I need a new politician in power. And I say, okay, how my power is by moving as many people as I can. And it sounds in some ways like so simple, but we know it's hard, right? And the thing about it is that when we are on Twitter or on social media arguing about politics, it's like we're in this bizarre world where none of that stuff matters. Like we're not actually trying to move anyone. We're not practicing the skills of organizing, right? Like if I need to get someone to do something they don't want to do, like come to my meeting or join me in advocacy, I have to think, where do they come from? What are their incentives? How are they motivated? What's going to get them to do something? if I want to send a tweet that's going to get a lot of likes on Twitter, I don't think about any of that. I think, what's going to be provocative? It's completely the wrong skill set. So I think what we have going on in American politics today is that we have a small number of people who are like, cool, how do I maneuver? How do I have a strategy to do something? And then we have this huge group of people. And by the way, the huge group is dominated by well-to-do, college-educated people who have the most latent power in some ways and are just using it on fluff. They're using it for amateur punditry on Facebook or Instagram. And so my goal is to move more of those people into the world of real politics, where we try to move the government to take actions that we want them to take.
Thank you. And I, shifting a little bit into sort of a different level of power, different form of power, I want to connect it with authority. And we talk about science and medicine, this idea of authority and trust becomes so important. And sorry about that. And then, so I wanted to ask you, Nneka, in a clinical setting and in your job, where trust in the authority and in the power of a medical setting and of doctors and healthcare is so important. And in the context of obviously the coronavirus, getting people to trust in what they need to do to keep themselves safe and keep others safe is so critical. At the same time, we're dealing with and have for a long time with inequities in healthcare, massive disparities. And not just on a systemic level, but obviously a lot of people have personal experiences in a healthcare setting where they felt discriminated against, or they felt that bias, or they felt that they weren't getting, appropriate care. And they already have a level of issues with trust. And even then there's the historical components where, it's quite rational to be wary or skeptical or afraid. And so I'm curious from your perspective, we're sort of right now, we have to hold both of these things in our head at once. We have to figure out how to increase trust in science and increase trust in the institutions of medicine and healthcare. But we also have to reckon with all of the issues that exist. How would you recommend that people do a better job holding both of these ideas in their heads at once? Because I think that's very difficult for people to do.
Yes, it is. And I will add a complexity on it. It's even more difficult if you are from a Black and Brown community and you're also one of the doctors or the nurses or the other health professional that you're begging, please trust me, even though you understand how hard trust is from your own cultural background. It's exceedingly difficult. And I think it's mostly difficult because we haven't, as a country, done a good job of reconciling with our history and where we are. I've been recently saying, and my husband said that I need to sort of coin this, but I don't think I can coin it. I feel like I heard it somewhere, but it's stuck in my head enough that I now think it's mine, that we have to have, at first we have to have a reconciliation with our past. Like we have to just kind of own it and reflect on it. And then we need to kind of sit with it and just receive what that means. And then we can move towards some sort of reparations, right? Like we can't get to figuring out how to move past this if we don't honestly take a look at who we are, what was done, where we are today, and why the systems are in place. And then just own that, like reflect on it and own it. I think what happens a lot of times is people assume that just acknowledging the disenfranchisement and just acknowledging the inequity and acknowledging that there's flaws in the systems, that's enough. Like, oh yeah, I know that there's systemic racism, and I know that medicine and healthcare has had a terrible history with African Americans and other brown communities. Just acknowledging that is enough, but it's not enough, because I don't think that people, through action of just saying that they recognize it, truly have been reflective of what that means and owning it and sitting in the discomfort of what that means. And then the attempt to try and just move through it and say, well, I've recognized it, so now I need you to just trust that I'm better. It's not gonna work, because people aren't going to truly feel like you have owned it and are trying to make a difference now. And we've sort of skipped that step. We're rushed to, mostly because the pandemic has unveiled a lot of our discrepancies and issues in a manner that is so public that the whole world is seeing it. It's not even just like an American secret. This is everybody in the world is seeing it. So we have to own that on a global scale. And so we're quickly trying to move to, well, we recognize that this was a problem, so now we're just trying to really fix it and show that we care. But we can't do that because we haven't done anything to build trust. We haven't done anything to make the communities feel like they are empowered to trust the healthcare system. And we're skipping steps to try to get to this outcome of where now we want you to do what we ask, because if you don't, then now we can't say that it was our fault, right? Now it's like, we gave you all the opportunity, we gave you all the data, we're going to set up testing sites, we're going to offer vaccines, but if we haven't dealt with the foundation of distrust, those authority figures who claim to have the answers to fix this won't get trusted, and we will create an even bigger problem with communities not engaging in meaningful conversations with the people who have the power to help with, making these decisions. So what we have to do is kind of go back and own it. And even though that is a time issue, it's the only thing that I think is going to help move forward. If we try to rush building trust between these communities, we're gonna fail, and we're gonna fail spectacularly during a time when we can't afford to fail.
Right. And when everyone's, talking right now about the coronavirus vaccine, and, on one hand, there's a lot of excitement. It's, we might have something sooner than we all thought. But of course, we've all seen the polls, and polls are imperfect, but we've seen polls that, in some of them, a majority of Americans, are not necessarily on board to receive the vaccine. There's a lot of vaccine hesitancy. And this is clearly going to be a big issue for the incoming administration. Day one of the Biden administration, what should they be doing, or, what should they be doing right now in terms of, you mentioned skipped steps. What are those steps, and how do they need to be applied at that top-down level? I guess, where do you think the priorities should be in terms of building trust with vaccine acceptance?
Yeah, so it's funny. Somebody actually asked me this the other day of, what do you think this new task force that the Biden administration has set up should truly focus on when they get started? And my answer then is still the same answer I have now, is they really are going to have to do a good job of partnering with those grassroots community people who have already started this work. It's not brand new. So if they try to go back to the drawing board to see where to begin, they're going to miss out on opportunities. There's so many organizations within communities who have done a lot of heavy lifting to even get basic, like, primary care vaccines taken by families, especially in immigrant communities, and understanding the trust issues that have been brought up with the anti-vaccine movement, right? So there's a lot of already grassroots work that has been done that the Biden administration needs to do a great job of connecting with those leaders. And the messaging needs to be, we are trusting you to help us figure out how to do this the right way. Instead of a top-down, we know how to do this the right way, we need to really partner with the community and say, you need to tell us how to do this the right way. We know that as an administration, we're going to be starting off on a very shaky ground to begin with. There's already significant distrust as a result of the back and forth and ups and downs of how the scientific community was made to be able to say one thing and then have to change it over the last year with this virus. So there's distrust just on how the administration uses their scientific experts. So we've got to get through that. But then on top of that, the distrust, of course, of administrations in general and how they affect policy deliberations for Black and Brown populations. So they're going to have to say, we've gotten it wrong. We're acknowledging that. We believe that we have the opportunity to get it right now, but we're going to need your help to tell us how to do this the right way. And just be humble enough to say, show us, instead of us being able to tell you. And I think that a lot of the people that they're starting to pull together in their administration know that and will use that kind of methodology. But I feel like the community needs to feel the truth of the administration coming to their level, so to speak, and asking for help. And that's going to take some big public statements and not just their community leaders saying, yeah, no, I got a call, they're really on board. And it's going to take something very open and deliberate and intentional for people to honestly believe that the administration really wants to truly engage in community level impact and make a difference. And then I think the conversations on the vaccine development, the science behind it, the fact that they did do studies that included Black and brown persons, because typically Black and brown persons are not in vaccine studies, like they were intentional in thinking about this, that will help. And I also think that strong communication about side effects and outcomes and being honest and open about what happens to people when they get this and not trying to hide it or make it seem like the normal immune response is somehow a negative or somehow, the mythology of it giving you COVID, being able to manage and deal with on a true transparent communication plan will probably be the only way to increase the opportunity for Black and brown populations to get vaccinated.
And, it's interesting because we the collective, we often talk about like, how do we increase trust in science with like that capital S science, but really we're talking about how do we, trust, you don't trust an institution, you trust people, you trust leaders. And so it sounds like you're saying there has to be a more sort of grassroots up level of leadership, of developing trust in that more sort of local way of what does, any individual community need. And so that we can stop sort of, thinking about there's just trust at the most top level and trust in the institution of science, which isn't really how trust functions, right?
Exactly, right. Trust is a two-way street, and you don't just get it just because you can put expert behind your name, right? You have to show me the reason why I need to trust you, and I have to show you the reason why you need to trust me. And what has happened in marginalized communities is the top has not done anything to show a genuine reason for why they need to be trusted.
Yeah, it's really interesting. There's obviously been a lot of efforts. We can't talk about this topic without looking at social media, without looking at the proliferation of distrust, but also of disinformation and intentional efforts to confuse people, to overwhelm, and to make people more distrustful. And, there's obviously legitimate reasons to be skeptical. And then there are all of the efforts to make those things worse. And there's the infrastructure of social media itself, which in many ways is built to designed to increase uncertainty and outrage and fear. And so, Eitan, I'm curious, the concept that you've been talking about, political hobbyism, and this idea that we are sort of overwhelmed by the noise that we encounter, and yet we're not really doing anything about it, and not engaging, in a civic way. Are social feeds just a bad place to participate in power and politics, or are we just using them the wrong way?
That's a good question. I think they can be used effectively, and you see some groups using it effectively that have, been like organizing groups that have come up, say, since the Trump era on the left, or Tea Party groups before that on the right, when they are connected to a real world community. That is, when a Facebook group is for a local civic or church organization, for example, then what the online helps people stay connected who are already connected, but they get to share pictures, they get to reinforce their social ties. Social media that is just like one-off, like I'm following a feed of people who are, provide interesting stories or whatever, that can be powerful and primarily in a destructive way. Okay, so, or that's not, I wouldn't quite put it that way. You can organize certain things very quickly on social media, like a protest. You can spread misinformation about an election. You can start a conspiracy theory that if it's fun and has all the workings of a juicy story will get people on board. What you can't do is building up slow and steady legitimacy and power in a place. So I use an example of this often from another country, from actually the Arab Spring, this series of protest movements almost 10 years ago now that showcased one form of power of social media, organizing protests quickly. Take Egypt, for example. A lot of protests got people into Tahrir Square in Cairo, and an authoritarian dictator was toppled. That social media did very well. Got people organized, got people connected. What social media did terribly was the next step, which is organizing for an election, getting people out to vote. And obviously, if you know the history of what happened in Egypt after there, you had a group, the Muslim Brotherhood, take over, and then a coup, and then back to authoritarian land here. And a lot of people across the Arab world died and have been displaced as a result of movements that were able to destroy but not build up. So I think what we're seeing on social media right now, for example, with respect to conspiracies about the election, you see this ability to spread misinformation because it makes people, it reinforces what they love to see, which is the other side being bad, their side being good, all sorts of deviousness. That's, if you're on politics for entertainment, it's providing that. It can be destructive in that way, but it's not the path. It can't be the path to like getting someone elected or building trust in local leaders and being able to say, this is a pastor, a community leader, a doctor that I trust, and I'm going to follow their path. Because when it's all decentralized and you're just following random people that like make your brain feel connected to some exciting political moment, you're never going to get that. So yeah, I mean, I would say like that's a sort of a long and winding answer, but I think the good ways to use social media are when they're tied to a real world. And the bad ways to use it are when they're just sort of reinforcing your political ideas, because then you get down that rabbit hole. Then you get from, oh, I like this set of leaders or this set of ideas to like, let me find the most extreme, weird stuff out there because that's the stuff that provides me with entertainment when I'm scrolling on my phone.
Right. As someone who has been reporting on, the psychological effects of social media and the infrastructure of it, and just disinformation in general and how it spreads, one of the questions I just personally ask myself if I mindlessly open Twitter or any social feed is recognizing that I'm here to entertain myself. I'm here because I might be bored. I'm here because I'm looking for that jolt of whatever it might be, humor, outrage, that the implicit, shared implicit understanding of a meme. But to know that when I'm like searching for information, that's quite different when I'm searching for knowledge or news, and to separate that out in my own head.
One of the most, I think, engaging scientific studies of misinformation has been this finding that the people who see the most fake news are the people who also see the most real news. So you might think that like people are going to be duped by fake news online. Like that's a motivating concern to study fake news and misinformation. But actually, it's people who are already like into politics so much that when like and they're like, scrolling their feed, or like me, they're like, they see some headline that can't be right, but it's just very exciting, the headline. So you click on it, and that's the kind of person who consumes the most misinformation. They're not being duped. They're like playing this fantasy game of politics.
So, the fantasy game, and I want to ask both of you what this question goes to both of you. Right now, there's a feeling that, okay, there's a lot of, good things coming, and there's a return to expertise, and, there's a path forward where there are some, they're promising ways to confront the pandemic among many other issues in this country. But I think, going back to the theme of uncertainty, we are so divided. And a big question that I hear a lot from people is, well, how do we reconcile a shared reality? How do we restore a shared reality? Because, the act of power, of course, and like you said, getting people to do what they don't necessarily want to do, or even just connecting with your community, connecting with people who share different views, it all can feel a little bit, doomed if we don't have a shared reality. And I'm, not that we ever had one to begin with, not that this idea of one reality was ever in place. And without getting too philosophical about it, what do you think you know, as a country, we need to do to restore just a shared baseline so that we can even begin to have conversations where we can still disagree and figure out, you know, what is going to get us to the best policy. But we have to first start on the foundation of sharing the same facts or the same truths. What do you think? And of course, we all know the numbers. We're so divided, so polarized. You know, trust in institutions is way down. What are some of the first steps to do that healing? Nneka, if you want to start.
Yeah, sure. We started the conversation off with talking about sort of your sphere of influence and the people around you and the power that each individual has to affect change sort of at their local level. I think that's where it begins. I think that it begins with taking the time to have conversations with your neighbors or your family members or your friends, like virtually now, right? Because everybody needs to stay home and stay away. But to honestly have a meaningful person to person, not via Facebook, not through Twitter, not, you know, short responses, but just a meaningful conversation to say, we can't move forward as divided as we are now. So what is it that is truly keeping us from being able to have common ground? Maybe it's storytelling. Maybe you've been so divided that you missed out on things that were important. And now it's an opportunity to say, even if we can't talk about the politics, and maybe we can talk about that birthday party that I missed, like just something to bring connection back, because the only way to address the divide is to reinvigorate the humanity between us. And I think that we have done a good job of making it feel like it's an us versus them for a long time. And the ability to just share lived experiences has always been the strongest way to help people move forward. And storytelling has always been a great mechanism for people to have empathy and understanding. And creating these spaces, have coffee in the morning with a friend that you unfriended on Facebook because they posted things that were from, you know, a different political party than you, or they pushed for something that you disagreed with. Set up a time to just sit and have a conversation over Zoom and just be like, you know what, how about we put that in the past? There was a reason why we were friends before. Let's revisit that and figure out how to mend these fences. And if that means that we don't talk about politics, then don't talk about politics, but then bring back the connection with the other person. And maybe a day will come in the future where you're strong enough again in your relationship that maybe you can tackle the things that cause such a difficult divide in a manner that's more respectful and able to hear the other person and have empathy for the other person's position. And then there's growth. I think that if you start that on a small, like independent local level, then it just kind of ricochets out. If everybody engages their own sphere of influence, that moves across the country. And now that we have to do everything remotely, you can reach out to people that you normally wouldn't have because they're not necessarily in your neighborhood, but they could be in another country or another part of this country, and have those similar conversations to make it happen sooner rather than later. I established a equity and inclusion mommy group. Speaking of Facebook, I love Facebook mommy groups. Mommy group here in my little part of Minnesota that is a 89% white area, and I think it's something like 60% Republican, very strong Republican area. And I established an equity group to talk about racial inequality, inequity, and specifically addressing it from a school system perspective, because I have two children who identify as Black, who will be going into schools where they will be the only in many of their classes because there's just not enough of a population for there to be anything other than. And so I want to ensure that they have opportunities like every other kid does, and they're not marginalized and they're not otherized. And so the way to do that is to create a village for them, to have their own unique group of people who see them for who they are and not because of the color of their skin. And so they don't think it's weird that they're in their class because they've never seen someone who looks like them or any of those kinds of things that we know that happen. So I created this mommy group, and I said, the reason why I'm creating this is because I need you mothers to teach your children how to be there for my children for when we start school together. And that small little step has grown to over 300 moms in this group. And we've done book clubs to read books that they've never would have thought of. And we've had conversations about inequity that they've never thought of, and how racism impacts that they were not ever had to, bring to the forefront because they grew up in rural Minnesota and it wasn't part of their lens. And that small little ripple effect extends to the people that they have influence over. They have conversations with their family members about Isabel Wilkinson's book Caste, right? And the things that were brought up that they were never taught in school. And those conversations extend further. So I firmly believe that if we start seeing each other again as just humans who may have differing opinions, but we still have stories, that we can move through this divide and get back to a sense of community. Now, we've never truly as a country ever been very communal in our thought process. We've been very individualized in the way we do policy and practice. But I feel like we've gotten to an extreme that the pendulum has to switch the other way. And so maybe this opportunity now that we have will be a stronger healing and bring us more into a communal platform where we can look at each other and figure out ways to help others feel just as good as us instead of ways to only address our needs.
I mean, so well said. And the swinging pendulum, I mean, everyone talks about that, right? Like, oh, the pendulum always swings back. And I think, it can feel like we're in this completely unprecedented moment in a lot of ways. And in some ways we are, at least in recent history. But in terms of, getting, or pulling in the original question about how do we restore a shared reality for Eitan, how do we also use the opportunities of this particular moment to restore a shared reality or to create a new and better shared reality as Americans? And I think a big part of that probably has to do with new forms of civic engagement, or at least bringing civic engagement and making it accessible to many more people, and feeling like politics isn't just, a cognitive task we play online, but something that is embedded in our responsibility as Americans. I mean, how do we use this moment to really push that forward?
Yeah, I mean, all of us have this huge role to play in that. And mainly it's realizing this thing that what Nneka just described about this moms group is doing more in politics than spending 100 hours on social media. And there's a goal, there's a strategy. It's not even that tied to politics. It's certainly not tied to Democrat versus Republican politics. It's tied to her community and her family, and but she's moving people. Like, that is politics. And we, like, Jen, actually, when you framed the question originally, at first I was thinking like Democratic versus Republican shared reality, that there's a big divide in America between Democrats and Republicans. And a lot of people think like, well, in that divide, like, I live in a bubble. Like, all the people I'm friends with agree with me. The moment anyone starts entering real politics, community politics, you realize quickly this humbling thing, which is, oh, I don't have a shared reality with anybody. I live in a 90% Democratic town in Massachusetts. And if you work in the community on issues like housing, the environment, transit, school equality, policing, this 90% Democratic town isn't a bubble. Not at all. People disagree with everyone on everything. And in fact, across the country, I gave a talk a few weeks ago at BYU, Brigham Young University, Provo, Utah. So it's like maybe a Republican version of the community where I live. They have the same issues. It's all Republican on Republican. And so I think there's this huge opportunity when you realize, like, oh my goodness, in a mom's group, in my kid's school, in my church, in my synagogue, like, those people don't agree with me. And so there's so much work to be done if we take it on. And I think like the biggest thing is like, it's a cultural change that all of us have to make when we think about our role in politics, right? Like, if I'm at a dinner table conversation or in the Zoom world, if I'm on some Zoom meeting, like, and you want to talk to me about politics, like, I don't want to hear your take about like Nate Silver's polling. Gross. Like, I don't want to hear any more about that than I want to hear about like the Kardashians. That is garbage. Like, I want to hear, what are you doing? Like, what are you doing in your community? Like, how are you serving? How am I serving? Ask me. I want to ask you. Like, that's where politics is happening. And what it mainly takes is not a legal change. Certainly the Biden administration is not going to change that. Nothing about Congress is going to change that. There's nothing about gerrymandering or Citizens United or the Electoral College that's going to change that. It's just people saying, like, I'm going to buy into this.
I'm going to buy into this and realize that I can be much more effective, and also maybe feel much more engaged and connected. Whereas I think spending all your time being outraged or identifying with others on social media can actually feel just so much more exhausting, and in many ways quite isolating, because like you said, it never really gets us anywhere if we're not doing anything, taking the next steps. And even in a world where we're all, not able to go out and engage person to person, there are ways to do that now. Since we have about 10 minutes left, I want to start talking about how we look forward, and through, what we've learned from the past 10 months of being in this pandemic. And as Nneka said, like all the fragilities it has exposed. And Nneka, I want to start with you. You had mentioned to me a couple weeks ago this idea of like, how do we challenge these long held assumptions in the medical community, and of healthcare workers, confronting how much their profession in this current situation, they can often feel so unsupported. And it's also just bringing to light for them the disparities in healthcare in a way that might not have been, so clear to everyone in the same ways before. And I'm curious, like in your experiences, what types of reckonings have you seen in terms of people confronting how this is shaping the medical system, and how that might be changing going forward, so that this isn't just, a pandemic thing, but that going forward we can start to have not just a more equitable public health system and health in general, but just a system that exists and is stronger and is more rooted in community trust.
Yeah, well, I think probably the best way to describe what I've seen has happen is that prior to the pandemic, the biggest influence that we had to fight against was Dr. Google, right? And people would come into physicians' offices and they would get a diagnosis or have a conversation, and the physician would be, or the nurse practitioner or whoever the clinician at the time would be fighting against the, well, I read on Google conversation, right? And that we kind of got pretty good at addressing the Dr. Google. When that turned into political leaders, people who have authority within systems like the CDC and other science-based environments, going against what we saw in the day-to-day, and then us trying to engage our community in efforts to try and mitigate the spread of the disease and the impact that it was having, it relegated the healthcare systems and the authority that we used to have to be able to say, Google didn't go to medical school, right? or listening to, that one-off is not the case report. Like, here's the actual studies, here's what I've done for 20 years. Those kinds of authority that were imbued in you because of the craft that you decided to engage in. When that got challenged from all levels, it was a shock to the system, because it's like, then where do you turn to now? You are living this complete atrocity of trying to take care of everybody who comes through your door while watching other people deny your reality, that you're living through an atrocity of trying to take care of people that come through your door. The amount of times where we've had clinicians on camera crying about how difficult it was this day or this week to deal with their units being overrun with COVID patients, or their EDs being overrun, or not having the right protective equipment to protect themselves, it being unable to go home to their families and engage in what they normally do for stress relief, and any sort of just ability to keep burnout at bay. It's unnerving to know that that's all going on, but still the public and the scientific community that we used to use as our ability to shore up our authority in this decision making, it's now all being questioned and acts as if we're lying, or it's not real, or somehow asking someone to wear a mask is an infringement on personal liberties. And and causing them to have some negative reaction. And I still haven't figured out why the mask issue is such a big deal, but the reality of living in a space where you're screaming, no, we really need to do this, but nobody's listening, is disheartening. And I really worry and am very concerned about the backlash to the clinicians who will live through this. How many will quit? How many? We already had shortages within intensive care medicine going into this pandemic just because it was already a difficult, very difficult part of the field to go into. And then you add this additional stress of being the harbingers or the gatekeepers of having to deal with all the people who are dying or who have terrible outcomes, who have to live on ventilators for months at a time, which is not what the units were built for. It's not what the system was built for. How many are going to just say, I can't do this anymore? We've had so many die as a result of being on the front lines and getting sick, trying to take care of others. How many are just going to say it's not worth it? It used to be seen as a profession that was so honorable to go into, to become a healer, to become a caregiver. And you feel the jadedness of people who says, why? Why am I putting myself at risk for folks who don't want to respect me and do what they need to do to keep me safe? So it's all very stressful. And what I'm hopeful is that if we get better at having honest conversations and people start being more engaged in truly trying to believe the messengers, the people who are living it every day, then maybe we can stave off the burnout. But I don't know. It's one of my biggest worries is how much burnout will we actually have as a result of living through this untrusted time. And I really hope that as there's light at the end of the tunnel with vaccines coming out and people being, well, I can't even say people being a little safer because there were more people who traveled this year for Thanksgiving than last year, and there wasn't a pandemic. So I'm not quite sure what the result of that spread is going to be, but hopefully at some point people are going to actually now start being better at their safety, because the impact of this virus on every family in this country is going to get there. We're going to get to a point where everybody's going to have a COVID story from some way, shape, or form. And maybe that's the breaking point, because the people who believe that it's not going to be them or it doesn't affect them, and so they can just do whatever they want, again, with this individualistic mentality and not a communal mentality. One day they're going to need a hospital and they're not going to have enough clinicians to cover it. And they're going to ask why. And the answer is going to be because you thought you could do whatever you wanted.
Yeah. I mean, the issue with burnout, and the other term that I've encountered this year is moral injury of clinicians, and of just it going in such the opposite way that you thought, and of trying to help and being unable because of the conditions around you. And it's like in so many levels of our society, the consequences of this pandemic that are not just what we read about every day in, the top-down science or economics, but, the individual stories, and at each hospital and at each, in each industry of frontline, how this burnout is going to be affecting people. And so just to quickly wrap up with, we have just a minute, Eitan, but if you could help us end on a hopeful and optimistic note about what do you think is just maybe one thing that's the most powerful in terms of encouraging this communal mentality away from that sort of that individualism that is bad, that breeds sort of like the scarcity mentality and, just keeping yourself and your individual family safe. What is one powerful thing that we can do as a country to encourage more of that, that communal mindset so that we can have more effective politics and power?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I don't know if my answer will be popular. But my answer is basically we do need to buy into leaders, but not national ones. And we do need people who are going to be experts for us, but those are not going to be national media companies, national politicians. They never can be. I mean, I don't know. I graduated college in 2005, so I remember very well the New York Times doing its business with the Iraq War, and failing to vet completely the story, which led to so many American deaths and deaths outside of our country. We have institutions that have failed us in so many ways. And so what choice we have, I take religious participation very seriously. And we have so many stories of people abandoning religion forever because of horrible scandals among leaders. We've had doctors who have been scandalous with their leader, with the trust that people put in them. But I think, I don't know if it's hopeful or not, but I think my answer is like, we have no choice. And we have no choice but to buy into some community that's not just ourselves. And I think our best bet at doing that is having community that's local and leaders that are local. Community organizations, physicians, religious leaders, those are the places that are going to give us signals about what we can do together, about politics, about social life, about every aspect. And I think that's going to be a lot better than, and a lot more practical than trying to put our hopes that some, chief doctor of the United States is going to tell us what to do, or that the president is going to be always the singularly smart and put us in the right direction. So I think my answer is local leadership and local community. And I would say that that's not a depressing thing. I think that's an inspiring thing, because we've made a mistake, I think, in going so national in our view of politics. The news we read, the way we think about politics, the way we donate to politics, all of our eyeballs are so focused on like a country. And I think it's okay for us to dial that back and say, I care a little bit about our country. I really care a lot about our community health center, our church, our world here. A lot of people view that as like parochial, like, why would I pay attention at that level? And then, you hear Nneka's story about her mom's group. That's why you pay attention to that level, because like that is the area that affects you. That's the area that you can influence. That's the area where like power flows in a way where you can like change people's lives. And so if you're thinking about engagement in a way where you can help make the world better, it's really obviously going to start at that local level.
Well, thank you so much to both of you. This was wonderful. And thank you for both of you giving some really sort of positive and hopeful things that we can do. I think that those are the takeaways that going forward, even though it's been a very overwhelming time, that we can focus on those things and just feel better and, more optimistic, both on an individual level and on a, communal one. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, let me chime in and echo my thanks. That was a wonderful discussion. Thank you, Jen, for leading us through that so graciously. That was absolutely beautiful. Eitan, Nneka, I was taking notes rapidly. So many wonderful points you all shared. So I'm so grateful for your time this morning, for kicking off our symposium on a huge, awesome topic. And I have to say, Eitan, I think what you were just talking about right there at the end too is literally queued us up for a whole nother topic and discussion on something else when it talks about leadership at that local level versus that national level, and where do we place our trust and where do we look for those important leaders in our community, because that old saying of all politics is local is extremely relevant to that saying right there. So I'm very grateful for all three of you for joining us. Thank you. I'm sure everyone virtually is giving you a nice round of applause. Feel free to stay with us for as much as the symposium as you would like. I will want to let our guests know what's happening next. We are headed into some breakout sessions, so you can go and have intimate, smaller conversations. Each room is capped at 20 people. If we get 20 people in one and you're in there, you can watch and listen, but you can't participate. So maybe go find another one. We've got 10 great topics. I'm going to share them for you right now. Let me share my screen here so you can see where you're headed. There we go. So we have topics from a lot of local leaders, from a lot of national leaders, from some really interesting perspectives, focusing on everything from what do we do here in the state of Colorado? How does science influence our state legislator, from Senator Chris Hansen? We have another conversation about ethics. We have some youth voices there. We're talking about biases in the media. So all of our breakout sessions will be for 30 minutes. They start now. We'll wrap up about 10:45. You'll have 15 minutes to stretch your legs, get a coffee, get a snack, and then join us back here on the live stage at 11 for another panel and then a keynote to wrap up our day. And each of the breakout sessions will be both for day and on Thursday as well. So if you can't make up your mind, don't worry. You can go to multiple ones, both in any given day. So hopefully you'll join us for the breakout. The conversations will be really exciting. We have moderators in there to help you lead you through a discussion. And so go off and enjoy yourself in the sessions. And thanks again to all of our panelists for joining us for our first session. Have a good day.